In 1716, Christopher Bullock coined the iconic phrase, "'Tis impossible to be sure of anything but death and taxes." It's a phrase so simple, yet profoundly relatable, so much so that it's been echoed by Daniel Defoe, Benjamin Franklin, and your libertarian uncle with the "Don't Tread on Me" bumper sticker on the back of his truck. But what if it wasn't the case? Aside from the obvious result of sending everyone who works for TurboTax to the unemployment line, what would happen if everyone just stopped paying taxes? Today, we're going to find out. Taxes are about as old as the concept of centralized hierarchies, dating back into pre-Roman times. In their simplest state, taxes are payments made to the centralized authority figure of an area in exchange for the services that centralized authority figure provides. Former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes once said taxes are the price we pay for a civilized society. And while there's definitely merit to such an idea, it doesn't make taxes any less of a pain in the butt. The median income of the American taxpayer is roughly $56,000 per year, and around $11,000 of that goes straight to the government in income tax, as well as taxes for Medicare and Social Security. For anyone without a bank account in the Cayman Islands, that's a lot of money. It's like throwing away an expensive family vacation and a complete redecoration of your home every year. So it's understandable that a working Joe might daydream about getting to keep the entire $56K without big government skimming a little cream off the top. While in an abstract sense, we all know that taxes are useful, a few hours filling in your returns are bound to make you at least a little sympathetic to the 19th century French philosopher Frédéric Bastiat's idea that taxation is theft. As in any major financial decision, there are three factors worth looking at: benefits, costs, and precedents. What would be the real impact of a world where taxes were repealed? Or if the people of planet Earth simultaneously decided to object to all taxation? First, let's discuss the benefits of a world where your most libertarian friends get their deepest desire. The first and most obvious benefit is that you'd get to keep more of your paycheck, due to the sudden disappearance of both federal and state or municipal income tax, which would also be a huge boon if you happen to win the lottery anytime soon. Not only that, but your employers wouldn't dock your earnings for payroll tax under the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, making for an even sweeter payday. And if you wanted to spend that excess money on a new sports car, a designer outfit, or a pearl necklace, you'd also be in luck because there'd be no luxury tax imposed on those items. Ditto if you wanted to celebrate your fat stacks with some all-American booze and cigarettes. These are typically more expensive because they're subjected to a so-called sin tax. But that's not a problem for you anymore. If you're a little more on the affluent end of the scale, you can also smoke a tax-free cigar to celebrate the repeal of capital gains tax, typically levied against the selling of assets in stock and bond transactions. And if you have a wealthy, elderly relative who might be checking out anytime now, in the absence of estate tax, your rich dead grandpa could be a real cash cow. Though, to be fair, if either of those last two really apply to you, you probably have an accountant on your payroll to help you minimize the taxes you pay already. Plenty of the uber-wealthy already dodge a number of taxes using bank accounts and tax havens such as Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Panama, though that's probably a conversation for another day. Fans of The Shawshank Redemption will probably already be aware of the gift tax laws used by banker-turned-convict Andy Dufresne to curry favor with his jailers in that hit Tim Robbins movie. While the first $14,000 is already exempt from taxation, meaning one individual can gift another a sum of $14,000 per year with no tax on the sender or recipient. In a world with no taxes, you could give and receive potentially unlimited quantities of money without losing a cent of said money to an outside party. The larger sums of money you tend to deal in, the more you'll financially benefit from this sudden lifting of taxes. Though, once again, while the uber-wealthy save far more than the average person, the little guy actually needs what comparatively little they save a heck of a lot more. Next, property. There are a number of taxes levied against renters and property owners the world over that would suddenly be miraculously lifted in a world with no taxes. Property tax, or ad valorem tax, is a recurring tax on one's property, typically imposed by local rather than federal government entities. This can apply not only to homes but also cars, boats, and business properties such as offices or factories. The level of tax on real estate is also subject to change based on the perceived value of the properties in question, based on factors like market value, location, and condition. But this would suddenly cease to be a problem. Anyone with the proper funds could suddenly leap into the currently pretty inaccessible property market without the added overhead of these aforementioned taxes. Finally, even outside of luxury and intoxicating goods, everyone would generally save money on consumption in a world without taxes. That's because most consumer goods would suddenly experience a price cut without the added cost of sales tax typically implemented by local governments to earn extra revenue. This is one tax cut that would actually benefit the working class more than the wealthy because, proportionally, working class people typically put more money into the economy through consumption than their affluent counterparts. The same can be said for excise tax, typically imposed on fuel. Gallon by gallon, in a world without taxes, you'd start to see the savings pile up. And finally, without user fees, the costs on everything from toll roads to cell phone network packages suddenly drop off. And in a world where simply using a phone can potentially incur 6 different taxes, according to financial writer Bill Fay, the simplicity of a tax-free world does start to look pretty attractive. Though, of course, any situation can seem like a utopia when you only consider the positives, and that's why we're here today. That's right, it's time to ask ourselves about the potential drawbacks in a world where nobody pays their taxes. To understand why a world without taxes could potentially resemble a post-apocalyptic nightmare, we need to get back to the fundamentals. Much like any financial transaction, while it may seem like the money you're losing on taxes is just being flushed down the toilet, it's actually your part in an exchange with the government for a number of extremely valuable services that essentially keep society as we know it afloat. Time for a little reminder on the various vital services your tax money funds and why it could cause massive problems for countless people if they fell through. Firstly, healthcare and Medicare. In countries like the US, without universal healthcare, it's already a financial nightmare to get injured or sick. Government programs like Medicare are designed to lighten the load on the most vulnerable in society. And while the system isn't perfect, they've helped many Americans avoid slipping into destitution from factors beyond their control. However, in the absence of tax money to fund ventures like public healthcare and Medicare, privatization would fill the void. As a result, you'd have to foot the entire bill for quite literally all forms of healthcare without any form of government assistance. And you might think, I'm healthy, so why should I need to pay the government for healthcare I'm not using? And, well, if recent events have taught us anything, it's that you never know when you need a well-funded healthcare system available to all. The circumstances can really sneak up on you, whether it's a viral pandemic, an unexpected injury, or being blindsided by a sudden cancer diagnosis. Even if you're not currently using any form of government-assisted healthcare, we can still ensure that you'll miss it when it's gone. After all, nobody's healthy forever. But it's not just healthcare you'd be losing in a world with no taxes. The largest expenditure of the US government by a significant margin is Social Security. This particular government function is so universally beloved across political lines that it's hard to imagine a proposal more unpopular than even cutting Social Security, let alone losing it altogether as we would under a tax-free world. In a world without Social Security, millions of people would essentially be locked out of retirement forever. While the obscenely wealthy could save some portion of their money for a rainy day, most working-class people would essentially need to work from cradle to grave in order to sustain themselves and their family in a tax-free world. You might also think, at least I get to keep all my income, and that's excellent as long as you can hold down that job, but it isn't a certainty. 13% of the annual US budget goes toward income security in various forms, from retirement to disability benefits to cash benefits for the needy. If you can keep your job, this won't apply to you, but if a run of bad luck leaves you unemployed, your chances of ending up homeless and sick increase massively. And as we've already established, the lack of Medicare here would make getting sick a potential death sentence. Public education is another thing that would essentially fly out the window in a world with no taxes, leaving the education system as little more than a series of private schools. This would lock millions of people out of even the most basic education, perpetuating and even expanding pre-existing cycles of poverty and inequality. Of course, this would cause even larger problems further down the line, as having far fewer people in education has the latter effect of fewer trained professionals in key roles. In other words, only a tiny portion of a society being educated is literally always a bad thing for pretty much everyone. A well-educated world is a stronger world. In a world with no taxes, we'd be throwing the sick, the poor, the unemployed, and even veterans under the bus, as around 5% of the national budget typically goes towards supporting veterans injured and traumatized in battle, which incidentally is also funded by the taxpayer. If you're a fan of crop subsidies, working infrastructure like roads and bridges, law enforcement, national security, national parks, and public libraries, you have plenty of good reasons to want to continue paying your taxes. Of course, there have been precedents for tax resistance in the past, but never for its own sake. Typically, tax resistance is a form of protest designed to illustrate a sense of displeasure with the expenditure of one's taxes for something the taxpayer finds morally or fiscally objectionable. Various populations have consistently used tax resistance against their rulers for over 1,000 years, continuing through to the modern day. In 2017, after the election of US President Donald Trump, some anti-Trump protesters took to tax resistance in order to voice their displeasure, specifically by refusing to pay federal taxes while continuing to pay state taxes. Andrew Newman, one of the tax resistors, gave the following reason: "My tax money will be going toward putting up a wall on the Mexican border instead of helping sick people. It will contribute to the destruction of the environment and maybe more nuclear weapons. I think there will be a redistribution of wealth from the middle class to the wealthy elite, and Trump's campaign for the working man and woman was an absolute fraud." It's worth noting that tax resistance is technically breaking the law, thus leaving the protesters vulnerable to fines and even arrest for tax evasion, so it's one of the more legally risky forms of peaceful protest against the government. In conclusion, we have to return to our first question. What would happen if everyone stopped paying taxes? We now know that any benefits of a tax-free system would incur huge boons for the super wealthy while passing on the ever greater costs to the poor and working class by eliminating all the social programs and initiatives that make up society as we know it. While we may not always be satisfied with the way the government uses all of our taxes, a world without taxes altogether wouldn't even the playing field. It'd only deepen the inequalities already inherent in the current system, dragging everyone down eventually. We'd say that avoiding the outcome is worth a little income tax. Check out What If the US Paid Off Its Debt? And How Does the German Economy Compare to the United States Economy for more interesting economic lowdowns from the Infographics show. In the meantime, stay safe, stay informed, and pay your taxes.